Ondrash, the field watchman on Count N, S estate, awoke a little later than usual today. His sun, his year-round chronometer, was clouded over, so he couldn't tell exactly how much time had passed. Still, Ondrash knew it was late. He was accustomed to rising earlier. Truth be told, his nightly rest was never set by a clock. As the guard of the melon field, which was now filled with ripening fruit, a tempting prize for both men and four-legged pests, Ondrash had to be constantly vigilant, a sentry perpetually on duty. Unlike other men, he could not simply settle down for the night. He slept only when circumstances permitted. In fact, his attention needed to be doubled at night. Nothing is more convenient for a thief than the dark. If Ondrash let his guard down even a little, he could easily wake up to the unpleasant surprise that the finest pieces were missing from the property entrusted to him. And how would that reflect on his reputation as a watchman? Therefore, Ondrash always chose his time for rest carefully, so as not to worry about uninvited guests. He typically slept during the heat of midday, when everyone retreated from the scorching sun, or just before dawn. Even then, he was only half asleep, sometimes on the ridge between the fields, on the bare ground. So he wouldn't oversleep. He slept better outdoors, under the open sky, than in his little hut. The hut was low and so tiny that he couldn't even stretch out comfortably. A simple roof woven from reeds, fastened to ground on 3 stakes, with no windows and no door. That was his dwelling. There were no furnishings inside. A little straw scattered on the floor, a patched-up greatcoat that served Ondrash as clothing, a blanket, and general protection from the cold and the heat, a jug for water, and a 3-legged pan. That was all his property, and it fit easily inside the hut. It was a modest and poor dwelling, but it was enough for Ondrash. When Autumn, his adversary, arrived and forced him to move to the manor house, he almost always bid a tearful farewell to his little hut, his kingdom. Indeed, Ondrash is like a minor king reigning here, over the Count's best piece of land, enjoying absolute and complete freedom. Early in the spring, as soon as the last snow vanishes under the sun's rays, he comes out to witness the fields plowing. He does not return to his winter quarters, to the servants' hall of the manor, until the late fall. He hoes, he weeds, he waters, and he guards the plants entrusted to him. He devotes his entire focus, his full mental and physical capacity, his entire life really, to them. He first arrived here as a young boy, and although 14 years have passed since then, it would never cross his mind to trade his not exactly thrilling occupation for another. He wouldn't be better off, not even if he became an overseer. Here, he has proper lodging, and every other day, food and bread for 2 days are brought to him from the manor kitchen. And once the melons begin to ripen, he is no longer afraid of hunger. He doesn't worry about clothes, either. The Count's gardener, his master, occasionally gives him a worn-out coat, and the greatcoat he already owns, still in good enough condition, has served him for years. Even regarding his attire, Ondrash is perfectly content, modest to the extreme. He stretched himself out in front of the hut, rubbed his eyes with his sleeve, and looked around. The vast, wide expanse around him was a sea of green, like a magnificent tapestry, richly emerald and occasionally interwoven with yellow blooms. Here and there, the rounded surfaces of the near-ripe gourds peeked out from between the leaves. This year's yield, especially, had succeeded beyond all expectation. The soil here is dark and sandy, and thanks to Ondrash's diligent care, the harvest is always plentiful. It is a source of pride not only for Ondrash himself, but also for his master, Count N. S. Gardner. This satisfaction from a job well done is, ultimately, the only well-deserved reward for Ondrash's lonely, hermit-like existence. The field lies an hour's journey from the nearest village, and almost half an hour from the manor house. The red tile roof of the castle, with its 4 slender turrets protruding from among the tall poplars and thicket of firs, and further on, the lower roofs of the farm buildings encircled by a white stone fence. That is all Ondrash can see of the world. He lives here as if on an island, alone and isolated. A road does run right next to the field, but it leads only to other fields, and when there is no field work happening, a peasant with his team of horses, or some old woman looking for herbs, or driven by curiosity, shows up only now and then. Ondrash tossed a greatcoat over his shoulders, tightened it with straps, grabbed a chiganya, a staff with an enormous hooked handle, and set off on his usual patrol around the field. He strode deliberately, conscious of his own importance, constantly peering left and right for any sign of an uninvited guest. The greatcoat, which he kept on during these rounds even in the greatest heat, swayed on his shoulders, hanging clumsily on his tall, thin frame, shifting to one side with every step. Ondrash had a slight limp in his left leg. This flaw did not otherwise hinder him, but it gave him a rather haggard appearance. That look was further emphasized by his gaunt face, with sharply protruding cheekbones and already deeply lined with wrinkles. Ondrash was barely 19 years old, yet judging by his appearance, one would easily add another half-decade to his age. He seemed much older than he was. Perhaps the constant work and privation were to blame. Other young men his age generally lived without a care. For some, those years were still the poetic transition from boyhood to youth. Ondrash's childhood years, however, were just as overshadowed by labor, hardship, and deprivation as his entire youth in general. He had experienced no joys. His sole pleasure consisted of watching how, through his efforts, a blade of grass sprouted from the earth, how a yellow, cup-shaped blossom burst from a bud, from which a tiny berry emerged, growing larger and larger until it developed into a proper, squash-like gourd. And then came the harvest, the procession of manor servants with carts, knives, good cheer, and song. These were the only noisy days out here, and during them, he played a role of unique importance. They're ripening now, he thought, stopping now and then beside a beautifully developed fruit and smiling with quiet satisfaction. He admiringly inspected the remarkably fine harvest. As if carefully placed, 1, 2, up to 5 melons lay nestled among the leaves on a single root. Each one bore a distinctive mark. As was customary, every gourd was numbered, the number carved into its delicate rind. Ondrash couldn't count very high, but he knew each one individually, and could find every number even in the dark. If a thief, by some extraordinary chance, managed to steal one, his trained eye would notice the incompleteness at first glance. Ondrash suddenly stopped short. From the opposite side, near the cornfield, he heard a suspicious rustle. And indeed, something white was visible among the leaves, crouched low to the ground, precisely where the ripest gourds lay, the very ones designated for the Count's table today or tomorrow. Ondrash's tanned face flushed with anger, and his hand convulsively gripped the mighty chiganya, ready to strike mercilessly, without pause or deliberation. A quiet crunch of a cracked melon, however, clarified the nature of the thief. "Well, now, just you wait," he muttered, a malicious smile creeping onto his face. He crept carefully around the furrow, harboring murderous intent. He could now clearly hear the thief relishing its feast. Ondrash raised the chiganya and, with a strong, practiced arm, hurled it directly at the creature crouched over the gourd. A terrible yelp echoed across the field, followed by Ondrash's cackle. A large white dog, Duncho, sprinted toward the manor house, still howling mournfully and hobbling on 3 legs. "Aha, that'll slow you down." Ondrash laughed, limping toward the spot where the staff had landed. One of the finest Greek variety melons lay smashed among the leaves. The deliciously pink interior smelled tempting. "You damn beast," Ondrash grumbled, carefully gathering the remnants of the sinful meal, intending to enjoy them himself. In truth, Ondrash wasn't overly upset by such a disturbance. To take a gourd for himself, especially one of the first and most valuable, would not allow his conscience. But this way, he sometimes benefited at the expense of 4-legged pests. There was, after all, a certain bookkeeping for such occasions. The low roof of his hut was covered with carved tally marks, Ondrash's personal record, noting the pieces that were destroyed or taken on the master's account. He now gravely tallied the missing piece. Then he took his satchel from the rafters, pulled out a piece of dry black bread, and sat down in front of the hut to eat his breakfast. With a serious face and complete concentration, he cut the melon piece by piece, eating it with his bread. Sometimes he had only dry bread, but other times, if he hurried through his portion the first day, he went hungry until noon. Those were bad days for him, and they recurred often. Ondrash loved to eat a lot, as much as he could get. Eating was the only pleasure he knew, the one true compensation for his service. 2 days ago, By chance, Mara, a servant girl from the manor, had brought him an unusually large portion. Without it, his breakfast would not have been so complete. For his healthy, constantly demanding stomach, it still wasn't a large amount, but it was enough to sustain him until midday. Contentedly, he stretched out on the spread-out greatcoat and gazed into the distance. The sun had completed about half of its forenoon course. It wasn't fully visible, obscured by bright gray clouds, but it was hot, as though it were the clearest summer day. For 2 nights, fierce storms had passed over the fields, only to clear up for the day. A day of genuine summer heat. Last night had been calm, yet toward dawn, the entire sky had once again been covered with monotonous clouds, as if draped in a grayish veil. A pleasant warmth spread through Ondrash's entire body. He felt almost hot, lying so still, but he was as resilient to heat as he was to the cold, frosty nights. His own comfort always retreated into the background, yielding to the welfare of the crops entrusted to him. He never thought of himself. There was no one who would remember him, or for whom he should spare his strength. Like a wild pear tree, growing in the field without care or need, so too had Ondrash grown up, in perpetual want, in the filth of stables, and in the sheer hardship of despised poverty. His childhood was filled with the miseries of those poor, hundredfold pitiful beings who are born only to innocently become objects of scorn and countless slights, often receiving less compassion and attention than a chance-found puppy. Unwanted by anyone, indeed, appearing like a living accusation. He showed up one morning in the desolate servant's cottage, announcing his life with a cry. He was not met by a warm mother's kiss or a joyful father's smile. His mother, a manor maid, looked almost with hatred at the tiny, sickly creature struggling on a quilt of rough, bluish cloth. He was small and weak. It seemed he wouldn't live till evening. Yet, as if in spite of his unkind welcome, the miserable little body struggled on and continued to live. The dark, damp corner of the servants' hall was in no way a suitable place for a frail, sickly child. But little Ondrash lived on, and somehow grew. After 3 years, his fate improved just enough that he could scramble across the threshold of the servants' quarters on his own. Being more visible, he was more likely to receive attention from someone among the manor staff, who slowly grew accustomed to this new, unnecessary member. He often sat motionless for hours in a corner or on the porch stoop, always dirty, in a worn, too-short shirt, hunched over his thin, meager legs tucked beneath him. He would gnaw on a crust of black bread, or spend half a day picking at a chicken leg that a sympathetic cook had tossed him from a manor kitchen. Yet, even that time was bearable compared to the life he was forced into when his mother suddenly died, leaving him utterly alone in the desolate servants' quarters. Though they didn't let him perish, the miserable, barely 5-year-old, and now completely orphaned boy drifted like bad currency. He was in everyone's way, pushed aside by all. One day, it occurred to someone among the staff that Ondrash's usual corner had been empty for 2 days. They started asking about him, and it turned out that no one at the manor had seen the little boy for 3 days. No one knew where he had gone, and after a brief search, they did not pursue him further. Later, word spread that he had wandered into the fields and that the manor shepherd, Uncle Nemsic, as he was generally called, had taken him in. The rumor was true. Ondrash had moved out of the servants' hall, only to return for the winter with Uncle, and then regularly, every year, as soon as the pasture was covered with snow. This was a fortunate turn in his life, if the concept of fortune could even be associated with Ondrash's future destiny. He didn't find much more affection out there than at the manor, perhaps, but at least he wasn't in anyone's way. No one tripped over him. Uncle Nemsic was a man perhaps even coarser, more abrasive than those at the manor. He hadn't taken Ondrash in out of excessive compassion, but rather from calculation. Who knows what use he might be? Nemsic thought to himself, bringing Ondrash, stiff with cold and chill, into his own hut. Years ago, a small stray dog had found its way to him in the same manner. Nemsic had lured it in, raised it, and now the dog helped him with the livestock. Why shouldn't he sacrifice a piece of bread this time? 2, since who knew, this boy might one day be of use as well. And he was not mistaken. Little Ondrash, thriving in the fresh air and with regular meals, Nemsic's faithful cow, Rosanna, gave enough milk for both of them, grew strong enough within the first 2 years that Nemsic could already comfortably lounge in shade during summer. Ondrash and the dog, Lapage, completely replaced him in his duties. Later, Uncle Nemsic, for reasons unknown, was reassigned as the field watchman for Melon Patch, naturally taking Ondrash with him. And soon enough, Ondrash transitioned from being a hanger-on to the actual provider. He might have looked impoverished, but his body was hardened and tough. He effortlessly performed the work that had already become a burden for Nemsic. And so, Nemsic and Ondrash lived side by side, year after year, in the open country, from early spring until late autumn, dependent entirely on each other. Ondrash grew attached to his guardian with that instinctive affinity for a benefactor that is innate even in animals. Nemsic held the only tender affection in Ondrash's heart. They slowly became inseparable. Although years had passed since that evening Nemsic found little Ondrash in the furrow, years had turned the child into a boy, and the boy into a young man, Ondrash's mental development had remained stunted. He was quick to work, as much as his limb allowed, and dependable, but he was completely lacking in initiative, acting only upon command. The taciturn, rough shepherd never knew the way to a gentle child's soul. Ondrash knew very little of the world, only what he had absorbed from the staff in the servants' hall during the winter. That world, where he was so alien and marginalized, filled it with anxiety. He always left his field hut with tears, for it was here that he felt secure, free, and in a certain sense, truly happy. Nemsic and Ondrash were perfectly sufficient for each other. One was old, coarse, and embittered. The other, a young soul, not yet stirred to blossom. They formed a strange, yet harmonious, whole. And when, 3 years ago, this accidental union of two such different souls was severed by Nemsic's death, it seemed as though Ondrash would not survive the change. However, they kept him on the job. They left him his field, his hut, and Ondrash soon forgot. People who are slow to think, mentally restricted, easily forget even the most significant changes in their lives and quickly adapt to new circumstances. Ondrash grew accustomed to his solitude all the more easily, since he had been performing the work alone in the final years anyway, and because they hadn't reduced his portion of food, he accepted the solitude. If he didn't have to, he wouldn't leave the field even in winter. Back at the manor, he spent whole days sawing wood and hauling water to the kitchen, and everyone there harassed him. They laughed at him, called him names, poked fun, and pushed him aside as something utterly useless, while here he was the undisputed master. Once, tired of the work and stung by the servants' jokes, he fled to the field and stayed there all day, trying to see if he could live as he did in the summer. But the frost was so biting that even his greatcoat offered no protection from the cold, and everywhere his eye could see was nothing but ice and snow. Snow and ice. They didn't even bring him his portion, and he was forced to return to the manor. Too bad that in winter there's snow, and not nice, warm weather like in the summer, he sometimes thought, recalling 100 unpleasantries of moving. If it weren't for the snow, everything would grow and stay green even in winter, and I wouldn't have to go back to the manor, and Mara would always bring my food right here. The very thought of the winter move brought a faint smile to his face, but was quickly replaced by the sad knowledge of its impossibility. He was preemptively saddened, realizing that, just like every year, he would have to pack up, the field would be desolate, and the frost would destroy the last traces of his beloved harvest. That time was not far off. It would arrive before he knew it. No sooner would the first ripe melons be carted away than others would follow with wagons, loading up the fruits he had nurtured. The beautifully green-skinned gourd with delicately pinkish interiors, and the other kind yellow, juicy, and soft as butter. They are ripening now. The melon leaves rustled. Ondrash quickly lifted his head and listened, but silence descended again. It was only the wind momentarily disturbing the stillness and the suffocating heat. The sun was still hidden behind the clouds, but as it climbed higher, the heat intensified. The sky still looked the same as it had that morning, though a few white clouds had lifted from the north, drifting higher and higher against the gray backdrop. Ondrash was hot, so hot that his clothes clung to him, even though he lay motionless, at peace, like a nobleman. It occurred to him how much those at the manor, those who pushed him around in winter, were suffering now, one driving the team, another mowing, threshing, and who knows what else. Not one of them had it as good as he did. He was lounging here, cared for like a cadet. It came to his mind that it would soon be noon. Mara would arrive with his meal any moment. He smiled pleasantly. He waited patiently, thinking of Mara and occasionally grinning. Mara was the only person Ondrash was genuinely glad to see, almost as glad as he had been to see poor Nemsik. She, too, laughed at him, perhaps even more than the others, but Ondrash was not in the least bit angry. In fact, her bright, cheerful laughter was almost welcome. He felt he could listen to it indefinitely. He sensed that she didn't laugh at him in the same way others did, but only because she seemed to be laughing perpetually. Mara laughed constantly, and sometimes even he would smirk when she started talking. Mara talked constantly, and often about such strange, wonderful things, about music, dancing, the Count's coachman, Misha, the town fair, and who knows what else. Ondrash usually listened with bated breath. He would look at her so blankly that Mara would burst into giggles, playfully slap his face, and dart away like a magpie. And although Ondrash was sometimes annoyed and even hurt by Mara's little caresses, he couldn't hold a grudge. Instead, he would wait for her again, waiting impatiently. After all, Mara sometimes brought him a little something of her own, a piece of cake or some other delicacy. And after she left, a kind, pleasant mood, almost like exhaustion, would wash over him. Reflecting on her stories, he would briefly, almost desperately, long for that world of hers, the world she knew so much about. At the very thought of this impossibility, he smiled. But the smile faded into the deeper melancholy of knowing the inevitable. He felt preemptive sadness, recalling that this year, just like every other, he would have to move. The field would lie fallow, and frost would destroy the last traces of his beloved harvest. That time was near. As soon as the first ripe melons were carted off, wagons would follow one after another to load up the bounty he had raised. Gourds beautifully green, with delicately pinkish interiors, and others yellow, juicy, and soft as butter. They are ripening now. The melon leaves rustled. Ondrash swiftly lifted his head and listened, but silence returned all around him. It was only the breeze momentarily disturbing the stillness and the stifling heat. The sun was still hidden, but as it climbed higher, the warmth intensified. The sky remained the same monotonous gray, yet a few white clouds had risen from the north, floating higher and higher against the somber backdrop. Ondrash was hot, so hot that his clothes clung to him, even though he lay still, peaceful like a lord. He thought about how hard those at the manor, those who habitually pushed him around in winter, were toiling now, one driving a team, another scything, threshing, and God knows what else. Not one of them had it as good as he did. He was lounging here, cared for like a cadet. He realized it would soon be noon. Mara would arrive with his meal any moment. He smiled pleasantly, patiently waiting, thinking of Mara and occasionally grinning. Mara was the only person Ondrash was truly happy to see, almost as happy as he had been to see his late Nemsik. She, too, laughed at him, perhaps even more than the others, but Ondrash didn't mind a bit. In fact, her bright, cheerful laughter was almost dear to him. He felt he could listen forever. He sensed that her laughter was different from the others, that she simply had to laugh all the time. Mara talked constantly, and sometimes about such strange, wonderful things, music, dancing, the coachman Misha, the town fair. Ondrash usually listened with bated breath. He would look at her so blankly that Mara would burst into giggles, playfully slap his face, and dart away like a magpie. And though Ondrash sometimes felt annoyed or even hurt by Mara's rough affection, he couldn't hold a grudge. Instead, he would wait for her again, waiting impatiently. After all, Mara sometimes brought him a little something of her own, a piece of cake or some other treat. And after she left, a kind, pleasant mood, almost like weariness, would wash over him. Reflecting on her stories, he would briefly, almost desperately, long for that world of hers, the world she knew so much about. From her tales, from those vague, scattered episodes Mara entrusted to him during midday, hazy, indistinct images formed in his soul. Something that had never occurred to him before now sometimes took shape in his mind. That world, unknown and distant, stretched far beyond the servants' quarters and the manor house. Ondrash wasn't so foolish as to know nothing of the world. After all, Uncle Nemsik, a former soldier, had told him plenty. But this other world, the one Mara drew her stories from, was one he had only heard about from her. And strangely, Mara's mysterious world became somehow understandable, familiar, though still far, far away. He almost felt that through this world, he was gaining a certain perspective, observing and comparing himself to Misha, and then to Mara, that eternally cheerful, laughing Mara. He was suddenly seized by a wistful, fear-like feeling, similar to the loneliness he felt as a boy when he was left in the field without his uncle. And now, with a certain long-forgotten grief, he remembered Nemsik. He recalled how they used to sit together, huddled in the same greatcoat on bright, warm summer nights, from dusk till dawn, gazing at the stars and listening to the rustle of the leaves. Sometimes, at moments like those, his uncle would tell him fairy tales. Though Ondrash didn't understand much of them, individual parts remained lodged in his soul. These capture impressions, caught by his half-dozing mind and animated by a weak, childlike imagination, now sprang to life with Mara's stories. They merged and intertwined like tiny sparks or fine dust motes dancing in a beam of sunlight. Who could understand the uncertain play of his imagination? Who could fathom the vague images emerging in this young soul, in this awakening heart? Who could penetrate the sorrow that arises unbidden, living there untended, forming a circle of new thoughts, dreams, and a feeling of sweet anxiety and an indistinct yearning for something mysterious, unknown and distant, such as one feels especially on a quiet summer night, when twilight and fragrance surround you, and star upon star shines above? Who could understand Ondrash's visions, since he did not even understand them himself? If you asked him what he thought about after Mara left, as he gazed into the distance while her cheerful, healthy laughter still echoed in his soul, he would surely be surprised by your question and barely know how to answer. At most, he would say he was thinking of his uncle who had been so good to him, or of Lapidge, with whom he played and slept together on one sack like two good comrades. Yet he was surely recalling the vague, hazy images caught in his mind from Nemsik's tales, or heard during long winter evenings, especially the golden-haired princess. The image of the princess, bright and fresh, fit best into the framework of the mood evoked by Mara's presence and her rough affection. The princess was no mere figment of fantasy. She was a real, actual being. He had seen her with his own eyes. She arrived in a carriage inlaid with silver and gold, wearing a sky-blue dress, with a white cloud in her golden hair, her face white as snow and her cheeks red as a rose, exactly as the hero of the fairy tale, her liberator, had requested. She stopped a little carriage nearby and nodded her head at Ondrash. He simply stood there, mouth agape at the sight of such beauty, watching, and she laughed. But it was not laughter. It was like the chime of silver bells. Only princesses, real magical princesses, laughed that way. Two others sat in the carriage, and one of them looked exactly like Misha, Mara's sweetheart, except his clothes were strewn with gold, and on his head sat a strange tall hat like a chimney. That must have been the magical hat the princess had taken from the three-headed dragon's palace. Truly, Ondrash recalled the apparition of the beautiful young princess in those moments, and sometimes Mara's image would somehow merge with that personified idea of beauty. And sometimes it would occur to him, why isn't Mara a princess, or the princess Mara? And how would it be if Mara were not Mara, a servant to manor, but a princess? Then she surely wouldn't have to serve in the kitchen and tend to fowl, but she would come out to him every day and perhaps bring him breadcrumb soup and poppy seed rolls every single day. Noon was approaching, and Mara had still not arrived. Ondrash was growing restless. It had been so long since morning. His stomach reminded him of its rights, and Mara was nowhere in sight. The heat, too, was becoming unbearable. Lazily he rose, stretched, and decided to walk his round again. He could see his entire kingdom spread out before him, every tiny movement visible. Yet the time would pass more quickly this way, and he would sooner reach his meal, just as he had in the morning. He walked the perimeter, occasionally stopping beside a particularly beautiful melon. They are ripening now. In other years, the thought that the good harvest would soon be gone, that autumn and the long, deep winter would follow, filled him with anxiety. But this year he felt excitement. The gardener had promised him a brand-new, embroidered greatcoat with red lapels and tassels if the harvest was successful, the sole object of Ondrash's desire. What a joy it would be to walk around in a new, handsome coat, like a gentleman. Truly, the whole world would envy him. If only the gardener would be satisfied, so that what happened last year wouldn't happen again. Last year, he had promised and then given nothing. But this time he had to, because the harvest had not been as good in years. It was as if a huge number of beautiful, enticingly fragrant fruits had been scattered here on purpose. 2, 3, up to who knows how many on a single root, and all of them healthy and fresh. They will be ready to pick soon. They are ripening now. A female figure approached on the path from a manor. Ondrash jumped up almost like a startled rabbit to meet her. It was Mara, bringing him 2 days' worth of food. Out of breath, she set the bulky basket down in front of the hut and wiped her sweaty face with her apron. She was short and plump. Her short skirt and the scarf tied carelessly over her breasts made her full figure seem even rounder. Her face was heavily freckled and was far from beautiful, except for her bright, sky-blue eyes. When she smiled, 2 rows of small, flawlessly beautiful teeth would show behind the frame of her full, red lips. But Mara was not smiling now. She was annoyed that she had to carry lunch for half an hour in this heat. "You've got it good, you lazy bum," she told Ondrash, unwrapping the bread and placing it beside the pot, which smelled strongly of garlic. "He does nothing but stare at God's windows, and I have to drag food all this way for him. I should leave you to starve. Truly I should, but you're like a spider. You always get what you want." Ondrash laughed heartily and eagerly tucked into his meal. He paid no attention to Mara's grumpy words, which seasoned every lunch she brought. He was completely absorbed in the pleasure of eating, eagerly fishing the pieces of dough, boiled in the garlic soup, out of the pot. In a moment, the contents of the pot were gone. Ondrash flashed his wide smile, which gave his face the look of an oath. He was satisfied with his lunch, and felt like having a chat. But Mara was not much inclined to talk. She sat down in front of the hut, took the scarf off her head, and began arranging her hair. Her braid had come undone on the path, and a cascade of beautiful, red hair almost enveloped her, lending her a peculiar charm. Ondrash observed her indifferently, yet he noticed she seemed troubled. "Mara, smile," he said, grimacing so comically that at any other time Mara couldn't have resisted, but now she remained serious. "Leave me alone," she replied sullenly. "I'm not in the mood for your foolishness when I have worries enough." "What is it, Mara?" Ondrash asked, his face becoming grave. "Oh, everything. Yesterday 3 of my guinea fowl died suddenly, and today the peacock, you know, the prettiest one. The mistress practically tore into me, and what can I do about it? I'm upset enough myself, and she just makes it worse. Always. Even the cook is angry because the ducks are dying, and there won't be enough for the roasting pan. I am not to blame when God allows it, and yet they both come at me like wasps." And what you do?" Ondrash asked, now entirely serious. Mara's complaints move him. He couldn't help but feel sympathy. "You won't accomplish anything by worrying." "I will accomplish something. I'll drown myself, if things continue this way. What good is an orphan in this world without a father or mother? Everyone takes a swipe at you. Everyone wishes you ill. Even the one you give your soul for. Even he is nothing but deceit." She lowered her head and fell silent. Genuine sorrow appeared on her face, and Ondrash himself felt a great sadness in his heart. "Why am I alive when I have no joy in the world? I'll drown myself or do something else, and it will all be over." Ondrash bent his head, scuffing his bare feet on the packed earth, lost in thought. Indeed, how sad this world was, here and everywhere. Look, even the sky was covered with clouds. Even it was sorrowful, and everyone attacked you, and everywhere was falsehood. If things continued this way, Mara would drown herself, and it would all be over. "Don't drown yourself, Mara, don't drown yourself," he pleaded anxiously. "I will drown myself." Mara affirmed mournfully. Ondrash could think of nothing to counter her terrible intention, nothing to cheer her up and divert her thoughts. Misha is like that too. Mara continued after a moment, staring intently at the ground. I thought at least he, but he is the same, even worse. All the promises he made, forever and ever. Mara sighed deeply. Yesterday, he danced with Beta the entire time. He didn't even look at me, that lying fraud. Mara's voice trembled with held-back tears. It was not the loss of the finest peacock. It was the pain of a wounded, loving heart that painted her world in such bleak colors. Ondrash looked at her in confusion. Mara had always spoken to him about Misha, but never like this, always with joy, pride, and delight. Behold, even her world, the one so mysterious and tempting but distant to Ondrash, was sad, and he had always imagined it was perpetually bright and cheerful. He didn't understand why Mara was upset that Misha was dancing with someone else, yet the distress of the unhappy, lovesick girl deeply affected his own simple mind. What is he to you, Mara? You don't have to be sad because of him. Ondrash said after a moment. What is he to me? It's easy for you to say that when you don't know what it is, you don't know what true, sincere love is. Misha doesn't know either. If he did, he wouldn't do this to me, this torture. She fell silent again, and Ondrash was quiet too. Indeed, Mara was right. He didn't know why she was crying over Misha. He wouldn't cry. He had never liked Misha. He was arrogant, and in winter, he often picked on Ondrash. Once, he had bound him up like a goat until all his bones cracked. And when Ondrash started to cry, Misha only laughed. He would never grieve for him. And I wouldn't care, either, if I had been the one to think of him first. But it would never have crossed my mind if he hadn't constantly been saying, only you alone, or no one in the world. Mara turned away and secretly wiped the tears from her blue eyes. And if it were different, but now, right now, he'll be leaving soon. We won't see each other, maybe for 3 years. And still he treats me like this. And who knows if he'll even come back from the war. They'll make him suffer so much there. And good for him. Ondrash cheered up. I wish they would make him suffer, really suffer. He's mean. Remember how he tied me up last year? I wish they would do the same to him. Even worse. I wouldn't pity him one bit. You shouldn't pity him either. What is he to you? I wouldn't cry, even if he were gone forever. Mara's gaze measured him scornfully. My God, how stupid he is, she thought, almost regretting that she had confided her deepest feelings, hoping to ease her aching heart. It's like talking to a stone, she sighed mournfully. Wait, Mara. When there's music, I'll spin you around until you're happy. Ondrash said, wanted to cheer her up, and he grinned so funnily that she genuinely burst out laughing. Oh, you are such an oddball. Barefoot? You don't even have boots, only those worn-out leather sandals. And even those are all scuffed. Never mind, but I will have a greatcoat. A real greatcoat, the one with the red lapels and tassels. The master said he would buy it, so I will have it, and then I will spin you around, Mara. You've never been to a dance in your life, and you think you can just dance. Do you think it's that simple? Jeez. Watch me. It's easy. Ondrash stood up and, positioning himself in front of Mara, began hopping from foot to foot. His long arms swung stiffly at his sides like wooden clubs. He looked so utterly ridiculous that Mara was doubled over with laughter. Slowly, she became so cheerful that she forgot the loss of her peacock and Misha's infidelity. In their conversation, they hadn't even noticed a change in the weather. The clouds, which had covered the sky since morning and were oddly colored, lowered. The air became stiflingly hot, like before a thunderstorm. And indeed, a deep rumble and roar in the clouds, which were approaching from the north with terrifying speed, announced a squall. Mara gathered her dishes and hurried toward the manor almost at a run. Hardly had she left when thick raindrops began to fall. Ondrash looked around indifferently, retreated into his hut, and ignoring the din of the approaching storm, calmly settled down on the straw scattered on the floor. A sudden, sharp current of wind, cold and fierce, blew into the hut, changing the warm air in a single gust to a damp chill. Then the boom of thunder struck, followed by a second, a third, one after the other. Ondrash remembered his melons. There's enough moisture Thank God! But let it rain, he mused, lying peacefully, wrapped in his greatcoat. He was not afraid. After all, how many storms had he survived here? Every year, all alone. Now he felt sleepy. He peacefully closed his eyes. But in the very next moment, a powerful roar and a strange clamor woke him up. He jumped, half asleep and confused by the peculiar noise. He crawled out of the hut. Just then, something struck him powerfully on the head, as if a stone had been hurled again and again. Terrified, he pulled himself back inside, but even there, oh, the horror! The same blows were landing on the rickety hut roof, amidst the constant thunder and the still increasing roar. Ondrash froze, paralyzed by terror. Hailstones, nearly the size of hens' eggs, were falling, striking, breaking, and destroying his entire year's labor. Deafened and seemingly out of his mind, he crawled into a corner, wrapped himself in the greatcoat, and closed his eyes, trembling. Meanwhile, in the spacious servants' hall, it was cheerful. All the manor staff who worked for wages and not for room and board were gathered there for supper. They were chatting lively. Almost all of them were young, farmhands and maids, and even the coachman Misha had joined them. He was everywhere, laughing, cracking jokes, and everyone laughed with him, amusing themselves so loudly that the old cook, overseeing the staff's meal, occasionally reminded them to be quiet. She alone was not laughing, although she was usually one for a joke. But the poor old woman still couldn't recover from the fright caused by today's terrible storm. It had swept through the fields like lightning, bringing hail and devastation that people could barely recall. It was lucky that the grain had been harvested. If the disaster had come 2 weeks earlier, there would have been utter poverty. But even now, half of every farmer's crops, the corn and the beets, were ruined. A great loss, and in such a short moment. But neither this damage nor the cook's constant admonishment had any effect on the manor's youth. Even if the joking subsided for a moment, they would soon forget and carry on. The loss caused by the hailstorm did not concern them. They would get paid either way. And the Count was rich enough. He wouldn't feel it much, either. What was there to mourn? Only one of them, huddled in a dark corner of the hall, was silent. He did not laugh at Misha's jokes. He sat there, wrapped in his shabby, soaked greatcoat, staring fearfully at the merry-making youth. They had found him in his hut after the terrifying storm, half dead with fright, and had brought him to the manor almost senseless. He was soaked, chilled, and they could barely bring him around. The immediate fear had passed, but the elemental disaster had affected him so deeply that he remained stunned. He listened to the laughter and the lively conversation as if in a dream, not understanding a word, entirely preoccupied with single thought, that his work was destroyed, that he had become useless in the field. Gone was his solitude, his domain, his meals, his freedom, and perhaps even the greatcoat, his sole desire. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead at the thought that he would surely lose the promised gift, just like last year. What would he do? What could he look forward to now? And what would become of him here, among this rowdy crew, not one of whom would speak to him as an equal, but only with mockery and disdain? He had always dreaded winter, and now, even a long, long time until winter felt endless. He wished he could just pack up and flee to his field, to his hut. But the field was desolate. Only blackened leaves beaten into the earth remained of the plants. He had seen with horror how the melons, the fruits of his labor and care, lay ruined in the mud, battered by the hail, the younger, more tender ones smashed to pieces. Tomorrow they would go out with carts, collect them, and throw them to the pigs. Not one would reach the Count's table. Oh, he knew well that the greatcoat would be for nothing. Supper was brought in. Everyone sat at the table. Only Ondrash quietly remained in his corner, the very corner where the tiny, sickly Ondrash, in his too short shirt and stick-thin legs, used to sit. They did not call him to join them. They deliberately forgot him. No one cared about him. Only Mara. Perhaps she would remember him. But she wasn't here. Through the open doorway, he saw into the entryway. There she was, standing by the hearth, talking to someone. It was Misha. Misha was saying something to her, leaning in rakishly, speaking convincingly and warmly, and she blushed like a rose and burst into genuine, cheerful laughter. The laughter of the servants weighed heavily on Ondrash's soul. Mara's joyful sounds reminded him of the pleasant midday hours, the meals, and her tales that always carried him away to a different, more beautiful world. The end of everything. Mara's own words came to his mind, and he was on the verge of tears. Misha entered and took a seat among the diners. A moment later, Mara came in. She caught sight of Ondrash, whispered something to the cook, and immediately prepared to bring him a dish. Ondrash stirred happily in his corner, but then Mara turned, her face flushed, and, slamming the door, walked out. The crew was roaring with laughter, making the windows rattle, and Ondrash again sadly huddled into his greatcoat. Some cruel, ugly joke when the crew had deprived him of his supper and the last drop of pity. Mara did not look back at him again. They treated him like an outcast or fool, though they knew well he was neither. They tormented him because he had never forgiven any of them if he caught them stealing. And now, their malice was twofold. Ondrash's apparent indifference only incited them against him. He did not fight back. If this were out in the open field, his Shiganya would surely have work. But here he was sensitive as a child. He doesn't need it. One of the men said, "He ate enough for free. We've fed that useless loafer long enough. But they won't any more. His glory is over. He can clear out the devil. Why keep an unproductive glutton? He can't do real work. Is he going to mow or something? He can clear out. His kingdom is finished. And so is the greatcoat. He's hoping for nothing. Only a fool would give it to him. The gardener won't." Ondrash rose in his corner. Until now, he had suffered all their malice in silence. The remark about the greatcoat awoke his accumulated resistance. "That is not true," he cried, rising and standing up threateningly. His thin frame, naturally tilted to one side, his messy, bristling hair, his eyes wide with fear, and his overall appearance made him look so ridiculous that the crew burst into unrestrained laughter. They encircled him, Misha among them. "Look, a hedgehog. He's getting all riled up," one of them shouted. "Shoo, shoo," another taunted, tugging at his greatcoat. The coat slipped from his shoulders, revealing his Shiganya with its enormous, hooked handle. Misha jumped toward him. "And what are you doing with a stick among us? You want to hit us? Huh, you want to hit us? Go on, strike, you little field mouse." Misha grabbed his arm, making Ondrash gasp in pain. Struggling to break free, he writhed like a worm, but Misha's hand clasped his arm like an iron clamp. The expression of pain and powerless anger on Ondrash's face provoked great merriment. "Go on, strike, field mouse, strike," Misha yelled, gripping him even tighter and tugging at his sleeve with his other hand. Ondrash gritted his teeth. "Let me go. Why are you tormenting me? You deceitful fraud. You lie to everyone. You lied to Mara, too. Leet, leet," Ondrash shouted. The crew erupted into tumultuous laughter again. This time, it was aimed at Misha. Misha's face turned red. In the next instant, the greatcoat, along with Ondrash's thin, meager body, spun through the air once, twice. Suddenly attacked, he fluttered helplessly in Misha's muscular hands. Like a thrown ball, he flew through the open doorway into the entryway and sprawled the full length of his body onto the stone pavement. But in the very next moment, he sprang up. The sharp impact of his head awoke all the wildness of his irritated, unrefined nature. Like a maniac, he spun around in the entryway, grabbed the Chiganya that had flown into the corner, and raised his hand. A piercing scream ripped through the entryway. It was Mara's voice, the one voice that alone brought to his soul a different world, a world full of light and beauty for him. Ondrash's hand dropped. A new cry of astonishment echoed in the dim entryway. A heavy red braid flashed before his eyes, and together with its owner, it fell onto the stone pavement. The blow intended for Misha had struck Ondrash's golden-haired princess. Mara. When the crew recovered from their astonishment, Ondrash was gone. He fled before the vengeance of the enraged manor staff could reach him. After the stormy day came a quiet and slightly cool night, a night breathing harmony, bringing peace to the human soul. The manor yard was silent. The staff had retired for rest. The day's bustle had ceased. Only the steps of the guard, who patrolled the grounds all night by the Count's order while the grain was still in stacks, could be heard. Through the open doorway of the entryway, A strip of light fell onto the embankment, into the dim yard, faintly illuminating two figures. Occasionally, a blissful, muffled laugh could be heard, a laugh such as only princesses, overflowing with wealth and happiness, might utter. And truly, hardly any princess could be happier than Ondrash's Princess Mara, intimately leaning her bandaged, red-haired head on Misha's shoulder. All around was so quiet, so sweet, and in the sky, star upon star, thousands and thousands of those small, brilliant, rejoicing points shone there in the height. They shone, they glittered, they trembled as if to the rhythm of the quiet murmur of the nearby river. This world, after all, was not so sad. Even the lot of the orphan was not so pitiful. Indeed, perhaps there was not as much deceit as it sometimes seemed. Ondrash vanished without a trace. A news report, referring to the elemental disaster that had struck the local fields and the principal manor of Count N, concluded with the following: all evidence suggests the storm claimed a human life as well. The corpse of a man, clad in an old, worn-out greatcoat, was pulled from the swollen river. Undoubtedly some poor fellow,